to the extent that they are now formally considered evidence-based approaches to clinical psychosis and are included in treatment recommendations like as NICE, for example, the National Institute of Therapy. Other versions of psychotherapy, such as mindfulness-based approaches, as well as alternative therapies, have been extended to the field of psychosis, offering a wealth of options for understanding and managing psychotic experiences. This is not to say that these options are available to people on the public mental health care system, although this is an ongoing demand for their inclusion by service user organizations. Another major development is the growth of the user survival movement in the last 20 years. The movement really started making its presence known in the 1970s and has grown massively in the last 20 years. Most importantly, it has moved from small grassroots organizations to broader networks and alliances, which are heard and have an impact on mental health services at national and international levels. And some examples are the Hearing Voices Network, the European Network of Users and Survivors of Psychiatry, Mind Freedom International are big international organizations. Also, and I think this is very important, users organizations have moved beyond critique towards developing alternative models of understanding and managing distress. As a result, key guiding principles of the user movement, such as empowerment, recovery, and advocacy, have entered the discourse of mental health services and are now an indispensable part of mental health policy. Their presence is notable, for example, in a series of guiding documents that the World Health Organization produced in the early 2000s, and one of these documents is actually entitled Advocacy for Mental Health. When used by policymakers and professionals, these terms lose, as expected, their actual character, and are to a large extent neutralized. I do think, however, that the fact that they have become part of politically correct talk on mental health issues is an important step towards recognizing people with experience of distress as owners of their experience and their fate, even if this is a total gesture of some kind. And finally, and I will close with that, alternative practices and institutions for managing extreme distress, a few of them user-run, have flourished over the last 20 years. There are, for example, now quite a few crisis houses, like Soteria House and Runaway Houses, institutions for dealing in a non-medical way with psychotic crisis. Also, active support in dealing with mental health problems is provided in numerous self-help groups, support groups, peer mentoring schemes, organized by users organizations, non-governmental organizations, and statutory mental health services. Probably the most impressive example of the actual organization of mental health services and radical principles is provided by the Open Dialogue approach, which originated in Finland and is now slowly spreading in other countries and in the UK. So this is very schematic. I wish there was a PowerPoint that would guide you more on the basic ideas, but a very schematic presentation of the developments that have taken place both in the understanding and in the management of severe distress. So I think if we wrote the book now, it would be very different. But they would disagree, so we'll disagree.
I know Jenny thinks that I've unfortunately I printed it off. Usually I just talk to the slides, so I know Jenny thinks that I basically wrote my presentation in response to what she wrote, but I had actually already started it. Essentially, I kind of think that there's been a lot of progress in the last 20 years. Some of it's, a lot of those changes have been good, but there are some significant kind of problems. And I think part of what I want to talk about is a little bit about maybe some of the process issues, about why those problems have got to why there hasn't been kind of radical change. He's already alluded to quite a lot in terms of the kind of globalising movement. So there was a globalising psychiatrisation of the world, and psychology's kind of jumped on the same bandwagon. We've got kind of the whole kind of neoliberal approach to everything now, kind of crept into mental health, and that's clearly going on. So at the end of what we've got a little bit on that. but also, so what do we do? And thinking also about how some of those achievements have kind of happened, some of the things that Jenny's talked about. In terms of psychiatric diagnosis, Jenny says one of the things that was really good in 2013 when DSM-5 came out was there was actually seems to be more of a debate than the previous version, DSM-4, when that came out. In fact, one of the people who was most vocal was the person who published DSM-4. It seems to be one of the most outspoken critics and made lots of quite valid criticism of DSM-5. Nicely sidestepping the fact that all of those criticisms equally apply to the version that he produced at DSM-4. One of the things that Jenny kind of talked about is also about the way in which alternatives to diagnostic categories have been kind of developed within psychology, within clinical psychology. One of those is the notion of formulation. I think formulation is quite a useful approach, but it does also have problems in that it can very easily just be translated into yet another version of diagnosis. In fact, quite a lot of psychiatrists talk about formulation and basically that's just diagnosis in a slightly human word. So we do need to be thinking about how we create concepts that can't just be translated back into the old terms. And certainly within our services in the UK, there are very much kind of disorder-based formulations rather than kind of person-based formulations or longitudinal formulations. So that's one of the kind of problems. And as Jenny says, there's been lots of kind of changes in the kind of conceptualisation of madness, particularly from a research point which you mentioned people of that kind of ilk who are working with a broadly cognitive behavioural approach, but one that's kind of socially aware. John Reed is another person that along with a whole kind of group of researchers who are doing that. Having said that, one of the problems is they actually find it quite incredibly difficult to get research funded that is more focused on social adversity. I mean, so they do get some things funded, but you compare that to the funding for pretty speculative biogenetic research. We have been being promised for the last 50, 60 years that the kind of genetic basis of madness is just around the corner, and human genome projects have made that an even more kind of tantalising possibility. And yet, all the research that happens, we know there are many genes involved in kind of madness involving every other aspect of human emotions and behaviour. I mean, it's incredibly complicated. And at the end of the day, that's the one thing that you can't be doing anything about. B, it's quite a kind of small amount of any kind of areas. And C, the things that we do know that actually do make a difference that you can change, in other words, social factors like adversity, are the things that you make the least progress on and that there is less research about and less concerted kind of policy kind of work. So I think those are some of the problems. And it's perhaps not a kind of small issue that those kind of social things don't really have any professional interest behind them. So my own profession of clinical psychology has done very well out of the kind of focus on individual talking treatments. I'm not going to say talking therapies aren't any use, but we've seen a massive increase in the number of clinical psychologists. So we wrote this book in the early 90s, there were probably about 3,500 clinical psychologists in the UK, whereas now it's close to 10 to 12,000. Now that's obviously a lot more provision of therapy, but the kind of community type alternatives to individual therapies and the kind of work to address inequality and social adversities hasn't really developed that much. If you look at kind of graphs of, for instance, the rising inequality between, and I think income inequality, so the kind of Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett's work, that's grown over the last 20 years massively. In fact, the last time we had decent kind of parity between the richest and the poorest in society were the 70s, which get quite a bad rap these days, but actually when Thatcher came in, she reduced the top rate of income tax from 83% to just over 40%. Can you imagine anybody even talking about, raising the highest rate of income tax to 50p seems to be contentious these days. So, those kind of things have got worse. Some kind of need to think about how do we change public attitudes to inequality, how do we get politicians and policymakers to take that seriously. So those things are kind of getting worse, but there are some signs of progress. Jenny did mention a couple of things, collaborative projects that I'm being involved in. So with other people, quite small, a large machine producing the report numbers, psychosis, and in the DSM-5, the response to the BPS and DSM-5. And those kind of projects show really how undemocratic the BPS is. It's great, isn't it? So a small group of people can kind of take over and persuade and take the lead line on statements and produce documents you need to get friendly people allies in key positions, chairs and treasurers. It wasn't a conspiracy, don't worry, but basically showing a small group of people can make a big difference in professional institutions. So I know professional organisations get a bad rap, and there are all kinds of compromises, which we can get into in the discussion at the end. So these are not the most radical progressive documents, but they do get wide, they get formal currency. People can then use them as kind of legitimising documents for their own kind of practices. Also was involved with a project that tried to produce an alternative abnormal psychology textbook where we had a chapter produced by service users. We had a chapter on interventions that critique medication and talking treatments, but also promoting community psychology. But these are incredibly complicated. That took about 8 years, and I thought, the last thing I want to do is to get to another multi-year collaborative project, and then walk straight into another one. So we'll be another BPS before next year, trying to offer alternatives to diagnosis and rethinking how we think about distress. Massively over-ambitious, crazy project, but there we go. If you only get, the more stupid you get, so the other kind of issue in relation to talking treatments and medication, and like Jenny said, there has been some real progress in those. But one of the problems is this kind of inherent neoliberalism that we have. So one of the problems there is these are obviously very, very individualising approaches. And all the incentives in terms of public sector certainly in the UK are towards more individualising approaches. So as medication comes off, patents actually prescribing medication will be cheaper than it was. But if you look at the rise in prescription antidepressants alone, we went from spending about £50 million in the early 90s to 400 or 500 million pounds on prescriptions of antidepressants. And if you look at where they're being prescribed, it's a direct mapping onto mostly unequal areas of the country. So telling talking treatments, that's good, it's more benign, the medication, and certainly there was some interesting developments here in Manchester, for instance. Tony Morris and colleagues are running the first randomised controlled trial of CBT for psychosis without medication, which has taken years to get off the ground. And I think CBT for psychosis has been, there's lots of problems with CBT, but it is, if we're in an evidence-based practice world where NICE guidelines count, then CBT hopefully provides one kind of thin end of the wedge into the default, which is otherwise psychiatric medication. The service user and survivor movement, like Jamie says, that's been incredibly important, but it is one of the problems being the way in which its ideas are being kind of bureaucratised within the NHS. So, for instance, the kind of recovery model kind of loses all of its radical edge, and also we do stop seeing when service user ideas are taken up, the kind of idea of it being a movement and collective seems to get lost. Because the medicalising approaches are very uncomfortable with collective solidarity movements, and that's one of the things that we need to be thinking about. So it's interesting that critical approaches do have some currency, but they have also got assimilated, and we need to be thinking about how we make sure that radical change continues. In a way, critical approaches are sometimes the mainstream psychiatry is often a bit like the monarchy, or about the political system in this country. It accepts enough change to kind of prevent revolution on the streets without making changes so radical that things really change. So if we were to try for radical change, how might we do that? What I would suggest is you have a look at the work of Gene Shot, that's the American Gene, G-E-N-E, From Dictatorship to Democracy. Some great ideas on campaigns that are really aimed at trying to get rid of dictatorships in other countries, but actually lots of those tactics and strategies could be useful in building about the need to have strategy, the need not to just stick with one or two tactics. So often it seems to me in critical approaches in mental health, what we do is we kind of focus on, one or two things. So I was involved with Rick, for instance, when we talk about how we rethink and de-stress and distress, and I said, well, we need a kind of political media campaign, and they said, we need a report for the BPS. We've got loads of reports in the BPS, we need some kind of campaign for everybody else to do a report. So that's what we do. But, we tend to be thinking about one-off demonstrations, one-off campaigns around similar issues, or writing books and articles. But we need to think, what are the pillars of support for these articles in the academy, in the public sector, in the NHS, amongst in the media, and we're thinking what strategies can actually monitor those things. So what are the alternatives that we can offer? So that's how I kind of, and also be thinking that change is possible. I mean, in the UK in the 1980s, the BBC That's Live TV programme mounted a campaign about tranquilizers that overnight basically meant that medics can't prescribe tranquilizers anymore for more than about 2 weeks. So those kinds of campaigns impacted with lots of other changes since then.
Okay, good. Thanks. I mean, good talk now, Ron. So we've got some minutes now for the discussion to take up some of these issues. So who would like to have a go while I move around and put some things on the table here for you to look at and divide later on?
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, someone here. Yeah.
Hi, first to pick up day one about the rise and the increasing number of the clinical psychologists in the UK. It seems to me that it's a number game. The membership of the BPS clinical psychology section is around 10,000 members, compared with the community psychology section, which is around 250 members. So it does mirror the society. You would say that there's so many clinical psychologists represent the power or the so-called accepted authority, compared with the newfound notion or community-based intervention, shifting from individual to the community. So I think that therefore if we want to encourage the change is really about how we shift that from clinical psychology as a force to the community psychology as a movement. I think that is my observation, and would like to raise that as a discussion. Thank you very much.
Should we get other people to sit rather than play people? Who else would? Yeah.
Just picking up on Dave's point as well, I would like your ideas about your balancing your careers and your experience between writing and between taking action as psychologists. And I find the pull in psychology towards writing, hence the reports, but I think my time is actually better used towards taking action, and especially when things can find ways of doing that in respect to host working as well, demonstrating how practice can be different, for example. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that from your experiences.
Well, I think it might be that it's useful kind of balance really. So if there are examples of practice, we need examples of practice and we need what we felt as well. So we absolutely need that, because people always say, well, how do you do things differently? There are some people do things differently, there's no answer to it. But also there needs to be some representation in the kind of mainstream, but people should be getting away with talking the kind of nonsense that people still talk about in mental health, for instance. So that needs to be challenged, and alternative written resources need to be self-marketing, but that doesn't need to be the same people. I think as long as there's some kind of collaboration. Sorry, I'm responding. Sure.
I think all of these, as you said, different courses of action are needed, and they need to be developed at the same time. In the sense that I think writing, for example, I actually feel reports, especially the test reports or reports, tools that a lot of us can then use. They're kind of under the banner of a professional organization, therefore it will be used as documents to prove that what you're saying is not bad, is not, it's documented. Also action, so I think a lot of us, we are, like I'm an academic, so I write, but also I participate in activist organizations, and at the same time, I think also training is quite important, teaching students, training future clinical psychologists in a particular way of thinking. That's another very important part of change. So I think the focus to the balance between these, or also different people taking different courses of action.
And I think in the activism, you need such space to be able to reflect. And one of the ways of reflecting is by writing. And a lot of the activists in the mental health movement write a lot, and they read a lot. And I suppose that's one of the things that Asylum magazine is keying into, the way that people reflect on their experiences by writing articles and writing books. And I think one of our tasks is to make the academic books that we write accessible to a broader range of people, so it becomes part of that political debate. In terms of activity, yes, I absolutely agree. It's vital, but I would put my political activity, I don't know how to say this, rather than putting my political activity into psychology, I'd rather put it into politics. Big things happening in politics at the moment, with the first shadow minister for mental health appointed by Jeremy Corbyn, which is a real breakthrough. And that's why we've got Jeremy Corbyn on the front cover of this magazine, Socialist Resistance, which I also love as well. Yes.
I think also it's very important for critical theorists to be critical of themselves. And it seems to me that often deconstruction kind of feeds neoliberalism, because the minute you deconstruct the concepts, then you have no responsibility for other people's pain, and so kind of sometimes I'm on your side, I'm a goodie, but I feel often I end up being like there's some. Also, I think there's a big problem. I'm also an academic. It's very easy to sit and write articles about these things. I'm a social work professor, but when you're in the field and you're practicing with people, I don't think we've translated these theories into enough practice methods that can really help people in the field. And then often there's that, I don't know if you read Falk's book about critical social work, but she says there's always a man in front of a class full of women, and the man's teaching Foucault, and then the women go and visit all the old people, and the old person is really happy to have someone with him, but the student understands that now she's actually oppressing him by being there, and so she feels really guilty, but she doesn't have any other tools to kind of actually, so I think we have a long way to go in being critical of ourselves a little and in developing methodologies that really help practice and not like throw away the baby with the bathwater.
Yes, absolutely. Here.
Hi, hello. Catherine Dobson. I'm interested in these kind of transformations that you've been talking about from clinical psychology moving to community psychology, but also what that requires. And writing to taking action as a transformation. What strikes me is how much has actually taken note of other branches of psychology, the actually applying whole other areas of psychology to assist in this notion of a movement. And I just wondered how much you moved, in a sense, out of this smaller audience at the moment to bigger fields. So, for example, marketing. So I'm just wondering how much you take note of other areas of psychology.
Well, I suppose one of the ways that it comes in is in the notion of the psi complex. That psychopathology is part of a broader apparatus, and that broader apparatus which individualizes experiences and makes people think that their problems are individual problems rather than social problems, is fed by marketing. It's fed by the personnel services in the large companies. It's fed in the prisons and the schools. And we've got to take account of all of that as well. So when we address psychopathology, it isn't only just in the immediate sharp practices of the clinical psychologists and the psychiatrists, psychotherapists for that matter as well. But it's also in that way that psychology is around, feeding the idea that our problems are individual problems. Yeah, yes, there are problems with deconstruction, sure, as part of neoliberalism, but there's a big problem with psychology as part of neoliberalism. Yes?
I'm enjoyed the program we have to couple psychology training program. One of the things that we try to do is to get friends to bring things out. I mean, I think having some idea about history, about politics, about drawing on community movements, some more interesting ideas in relation to developments like over dialogue and how it's occurring in those countries. So I thought one of those influences are from outside of psychology and then brought in. So I mean, that's what I guess social psychology, different kinds of critiques that often come from outside of psychology. I think one of my feelings is what we have to people on the psychology courses is that it's to read anything other than the latest issues of the British political psychology. They read outside and sort of kind of most of actually and so you can bring that to the students and change clinical psychology.
You say something also in relation to a comment before around clinical and community psychology. I think, thinking about it now in terms of also the way the whole discussion is going, I would say really that what has happened is that increasingly there's been a psychologization of especially disappearing disorders. So there's more and more psychological theories and treatments, etc. But they're which are located in the field of clinical psychology. So they're kind of individualistic. They explain severe distress in terms of psychological principles, and in some ways it's progressive in the sense that it shows that these experiences are meaningful, they're linked to a person's life, they're linked to a person's family, environment, etc., but it stops there. It doesn't go beyond that, addressing the social issues which determine or are linked to stress. And this is where a community psychology perspective will come in, but that's why we fall short there. And it doesn't come in because the furthest we've gone is psychologizing. We haven't, it's a kind of, there's no goal there around kind of addressing the social inequality and the social conditions. And this may be, I think this is where it should be, this is where more approach to this.
There's refreshments downstairs, but if everybody's happy to stay here, people are free to go.
Yes, of course. No, of course you're free to go.
Jamie had reviews actually, the US president is dining in downstairs as well, if people want to speak to him.
All right.
Well, I would bring you on